Welcome to this LinkedIn Live event hosted by Marvin Labs. The title of this event is AI for the Bottom Line and how companies are really using AI and the DeepSeek effect. Companies are increasingly turning to AI to improve efficiency and drive profitability, but the real shift is happening as AI becomes more affordable to deploy. This LinkedIn Live session with Marvin Labs will focus on how businesses are actually using AI today, what is making an impact to the bottom line, and how the economics of AI are changing rapidly. The launch of DeepSeek is not about a technological breakthrough necessarily, but more about fundamental shifts in the cost dynamics. With AI training and inference becoming significantly cheaper, applications that were once too expensive to justify are now becoming more viable. This shift is enabling businesses to expand automation, improve decision making, and integrate AI into operations in ways that were previously out of reach. On this LinkedIn Live event, I'm pleased to say I'm joined by Alex Hoffman, co-founder and CEO of Marvin Labs, and formerly also Credit Suisse and SIGI Capital. I'm also joined by Mark Bolton, who has worked for 30 years in digital business, digital transformation with firms such as Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and HSBC. And that finally leaves you with me, James Yerkes, former global head of transactional banking and wealth in HSBC. So before we get into the questions, and I know a few questions have been submitted to us already on this LinkedIn Live event, Alex, would you like to introduce yourself, and then Mark, you as well?
Yeah, hi. I'm Alex. I'm as James said, I'm Marvin Labs CEO and co-founder. I have a background in investment management. I worked for a hedge fund, worked on the credit side of Credit Suisse before that, and as of summer last year, together with a friend, I co-founded Marvin Labs, and our mission is to bring AI into investment research on the equity side and also on the credit side. So really that's what we're doing. That's where my background is. I've grown a startup before, sold that to a private equity firm. So I know the startup side as well, but my passion is on the investor side and then helping investors with some of their due diligence.
Great. We'll come to Marvin Labs in more detail as we go through this event. Mark, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, I'm based in Florida in the US. I've been here quite a number of years, and my career has bounced between major banks and then consulting to major banks, usually in almost exclusively in the change and transformation space where business and technology meet. And a lot of that story in the last 2 years is increasingly been about AI and how AI is brought into the banking world and into the financial services world safely, at cost, scalably, and that's really been the conversation. There's plenty of other things people are talking about, cybersecurity. I'm doing some work on that right now, but we're here to talk about AI. So this is a very interesting area to be talking about.
And it's an important time, I mean, to talk about AI, because I think particularly the word that's certainly been, I would say, on most people's lips and arguably within searches is this word DeepSeek. So just the first question of the day, which is, what's your view? And I'll come to you first, Alex. What's your view on DeepSeek? And are you surprised by the market reaction to its announcement? What do you think the implications are?
Yeah. So maybe just to set the scene and kind of help the people that were missing out the last two weeks of news coverage on DeepSeek. So DeepSeek is this new AI model coming out of the company DeepSeek, which is an offshoot of a Chinese hedge fund, and they build a model and they release that model in open source actually to the market. What the model did and what the market did with it was a kind of almost only comparable to the original launch of OpenAI. So the market took this as this is the next bit gospel. There was some staggering numbers in the model that got people crazy. The model DeepSeek's app is the number one app in the app stores. which is like completely insane for a product that is ostensibly a B2B product. What the actual contribution to DeepSeek of DeepSeek into the market is it's lowered pricing. So we have a graph prepared for that, just to give kind of people some idea of what DeepSeek did to pricing. So this is this is quality of a model and inference pricing. So this is actual AI usage. And what DeepSeek did, DeepSeek is the model on the top left-hand corner, is it reduced the price of inference. So the price of inference is typically quoted in a blended price for 1 million tokens, and DeepSeek is sitting at about 70 cents for 1 million tokens. Now, when DeepSeek came out, one of the things that they benefited from, OpenAI had just released O1 at an incredibly expensive price point at like $26 for 1 million token. So DeepSeek was in the position to say it's 98, 97% cheaper than OpenAI. But as you can probably see from this graph, we have OpenAI on the top right-hand side. OpenAI's pricing was so much off the mark that it's kind of an unfair competition. But if you compare it to kind of a more reasonable OpenAI model, the recently introduced O3 Mini, that sits at about $2 for 1 million tokens. So DeepSeek is a comparable model in terms of quality. We have quality here on the y-axis, and they score very similar in terms of quality at about a third of the cost. And I think the bigger thing is for people that are cost constrained, it's a massive step up. So the kind of the similar quality models were Google's Gemini models. They are in this similar price, lower quality quadrant here, and DeepSeek is a massive step up to that. So that really is what DeepSeek brought to the market, right? It lowered cost of inference.
I think we just put that slide up again, Ben. I think the fundamental question for me is that this, as you say, it isn't necessarily a technological development. It's a cost change, fairly seismic one. And this, for me, signals perhaps, and do you think there's an opening up here of accessibility of AI within much smaller enterprises than large ones, which historically, because of the cost, have been able to absorb some of these more expensive costs, and smaller ones therefore found it difficult to compete, whereas this is now pulling the cost lever down, making this sort of development and activity far more accessible. What do you think on that, Alex?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things is that kind of with this step, and we've been kind of coming around to this realization beforehand, but for almost every user of AI, AI is going to be a variable cost. You're not going to, if outside of the company DeepSeek, the company OpenAI, the company Microsoft, and some of the hyperscalers, AI is going to be almost exclusively variable cost. And now, so that means, as for smaller companies, right, everything in the cost is variable, so there's no upfront investment to use any AI, at least on the technology side. And it just opens up, right? If you are now if you're at a third of a price point, right, for a similar quality model, it just opens up so many more things. We've been on a constantly decreasing price curve for AI models anyways, but now you can do so many more things with AI models that you almost don't have to really bother about the variable cost, because the variable cost is also getting so small to become almost inconsequential.
Mark, what do you think of, I found that graph when I first saw it, quite impactful. It's really clear. I think it's very simple, but very clear. What's your perspective on the effects or the DeepSeek sort of angle that's been making waves?
So I think it's predominantly a cost play, as we're agreeing so far, and if you look at how they trained the model, they used a different approach from OpenAI, from Google, and from Claude, which and also from Meta, which where they use something called mix of experts, which kind of takes a more focused approach to training rather than what is traditionally the dense approach. And I think that sped up the training time, so it compacted the training time and possibly the training effort. They've also, I'm just talking about where their cost base comes from that allows them to price this way. They're clearly benefiting from the US embargo on shipping high-end chips out to China, because they've done their own, which was to be expected, really. And we saw the effect on the market when it launched on Monday the 27th. I mean, the big seven lost nearly $1 trillion in value that day. They put it back, most of it back, but there was a big reaction to this. So I think as a cost play, it's going to have a lot of impacts, particularly on other B2B companies that now have got a much less expensive alternative to the big four, and can now start to scale against DeepSeek rather than Claude or Gemini or anything else. So I think that's where you're going to see it. It's not going to be direct to consumer. It's going to be through other businesses.
I think oh, sorry, Alex. I was going to say, to jump in on the training and inference becoming cheaper. What do you think that's going to have as an effect on companies thinking about AI investment now that training, as you mentioned, is becoming much lower cost?
Well, and Alex is probably better positioned to answer this, but I mean, the likely impact is people will now be reconsidering about the extent and the budgets for training, and whether they can create their own models, whether they can create their own dedicated models quicker and easier and at much less cost than has previously been understood to be the case to train a model. You got this $100 million number that everyone talks about, and now it's looking cheaper. Alex, you're much deeper in this space than me.
I mean, it's an interesting thing, right? I mean, so DeepSeek published a paper for an older model, for what they call the V3 model, and the model everybody gets excited about is DeepSeek R, and they had a prior model, a V3, and it's not getting into the details what the difference is, but they published a paper there, and they announced how many teraflops it took to train the model, to do the actual training loop. And people kind of concluded that is equivalent to about 5.6 million in cost. Now, I think there is a bunch of things to say about that. One of them is they are actually one of the very few companies that publish this number, right? Nobody has any benchmark to compare this number. OpenAI doesn't publish this number, even though they have open in their name. Meta is probably the one that is coming close to publishing this, but they are fairly cagey on this as well, on the actual details of their expenditures. So nobody else is really publishing this number. So it's kind of the first data point people have, and it's a sliver of the cost of the model, right? It doesn't cover data acquisition. It doesn't cover pre-training, so getting all the data into a good shape. It doesn't cover post-training, which is kind of where a lot of the expenses are. It doesn't cover R&D cost. It doesn't cover all the failed model attempts that they surely had. So it's completely unclear how this 5.6 million number relates to the 100 million that an OpenAI model costs. And it's almost inconsequential where the number is, because realistically, at least OpenAI, and at least the other kind of hyperscaler, Anthropic, Google, Microsoft, Meta, I don't think they're banking on their business cases. Their pricing clearly isn't recuperating the cost of model training in any reasonable amount of time. I think they're writing it off, and you can clearly see it in OpenAI's leaked financials. They are not planning on recouping the cost of model training, at least for the foreseeable future.
I mean, Mark, you touched upon the US piece with chips earlier. Do you think, I mean, what's your view, if I come to you first, then Alex, on DeepSeek being developed by a Chinese firm? Do you have any privacy, compliance, or security concerns, potentially utilizing models developed in China? Just be interested to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, theoretically, I mean, the research I've done suggests that DeepSeek offers a number of models, and for their older model, but their V1, I think, you can get access to that, and all of the data they say is containerized within the US. They work with Microsoft, and they work with another company. Whose name I can't find in my notes, but it's here somewhere. But they're certainly working with 2 US companies and keeping data onshore in the US. But for V3, it goes back to servers in China, of course. So there'll be a significant part of the economy that says we don't want to take data privacy risks, we don't want to take confidentiality risks, we don't want to take intelligence and security risks. But you know what? Most people are not doing that kind of thing. Most people are writing content for email campaigns, right? Or they're building tools to do something fairly prosaic. And for them, those concerns are not going to be there in the same way. So I think DeepSeek is likely to pick up customers quite quickly. And people will start to investigate swapping out more expensive alternatives for DeepSeek. Now, when you're big, when you're scaled, that's a complicated, expensive, long decision process to decide to integrate another LLM and potentially reduce volume for existing LLMs. But for smaller businesses and smaller tool producers, it's something they're probably looking at right now.
I know where I got my emails from now. When you send me emails, you're using DeepSeek. Alex, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the China angle is a bit overblown. I mean, true, they host a model in China, they host their own solution in China. They are a Chinese company after all. They have to adhere to Chinese local regulation, and that has for an American, for a European, that has some consequences that you can kind of quite easily point out. I don't think anybody is pointing out the same kind of moderation policies that OpenAI has for touchy subjects in the US, and nobody's pointing out any EU issues because there is no comparable EU model out there that is even coming close to anything in quality. So I think it's a neat way. It's a nice thing to point out because if you want to get clicks, if you want to get the headline, but it's kind of not a real concern. And the other thing is, I mean, it is open source, right? You can just download it and run it on your own infrastructure. They are running it on AWS infrastructure. So we are actually piping through Microsoft infrastructure to get their model, and it resides on a server somewhere in the US on the West Coast. So it's subject to West Coast jurisdiction. You pay Microsoft a small markup for that luxury, but I mean, realistically, it's still considerably cheaper than running stuff through an OpenAI model. And I think that takes out so much of the risk. And I think if it weren't for this historical accident that it's a Chinese company developing it, I don't think anybody would make any qualms about this. And I mean, I don't think there's any major conspiracy or whatever people are suggesting of China hovering up all private data, because Marcus has said, right, it's all emails, it's you're optimizing a social media post. It's like 90% of traffic on an LLM is still kind of fairly innocuous.
Yeah.
We started touching on some practical application, which sort of brings me around to, we're now over 2 years past the introduction of modern AI systems. And Alex, with most of the market in earnings season, what trends are you seeing in AI reporting? It'd be quite good to sort of move into some practical pieces now.
Yeah. Yes, that's very interesting. I mean, you clearly have, and we have a chart for that, and maybe we can bring that up. You clearly have the CapEx side of things, right? You have the Meta's announcing 65 billion CapEx, the Microsoft's announcing 80 plus billion in CapEx. You're having kind of all of these massive CapEx announcements. So we just wanted to put this chart on there because it's impressive, right? We're with 250 billion in CapEx from the hyperscalers. So that's, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Meta, Oracle, Apple, and then kind of some of the large startups, including XAI, Elon Musk's venture in this space. So it's 250 billion in CapEx, and that's a number that is up 75% year on year compared to 2023. So it's massive, and it's announced and somehow expected to grow to about 400 billion a year by the end of the decade. Now, I think there might be. I wouldn't kind of take these numbers that we see for 2025 as gospel. Meta was in an incredibly awkward situation where they basically announced that they are for 2024 they're at about 40 billion CapEx. They announced they're moving to 65 billion, and then 2 minutes later the DeepSeek paper dropped. It was literally within an hour or so. So I'm sure somebody like Meta, somebody that kind of really doesn't have any business selling AI inference to third parties, might reconsider some of their CapEx. I'm sure somebody like an Apple might reconsider some of their CapEx decisions. But you have these the cloud vendors in there that have massive CapEx, right? You have Microsoft, Amazon, Oracle is coming kind of more and more into the market. You have Google, Oracle is also involved in this fantastic project. The what's it called? Stargate project.
Stargate,
yeah.
Which was a good television series as well, I should add. when they went back in time. I don't know if you've seen it.
It's in the 90s, right?
It is, yeah. I did look that up. It's what I got when I looked it up initially.
Yeah, so I mean, you have these people. So that's clearly one side, right? One side is crazy amounts of CapEx, and I mean, still on the US side, right? Most of this crazy amount of CapEx is going into NVIDIA. So that's still there. And then the other side that you start to see is companies reporting on actual AI success stories. Because there's kind of two ways of looking at AI in the market, right? One of them is you are Microsoft, you're selling AI inference to somebody else, right? Somebody pays you basically for compute plus a bit of a markup. And then you are a Meta, which is, I think, the prototypical example, right? You're not a cloud vendor, right? You're not selling inference or training to a third party. What you're really doing with AI is you have a business case where you have an incredibly great ROI on some of your inference, and you're just in the market to, build inference for yourself. Now, if you're at a meta scale, that might be sensible. There are other examples who don't think that's sensible. If you look at an Apple, so for comparison, Apple sits at about $10-12 billion of CapEx. And that's more or less a fixed number. They don't do any AI development. They don't do, anything meaningful in this space. And you might be looking back at this and come to the conclusion that Apple actually did a pretty good job kind of sitting it out, building a good use case for AI inference, which I'm sure they have. And then profiting from everybody else, VCs, sovereign wealth funds, eating up the cost of model building and development.
And Mark, what's your thoughts on that? Before I want to come back on what you just said there, Alex, as well. But Mark, what's your thoughts?
What was the original question, James? Just remind me.
I talked for such a long time.
No. It was. I think it was very insightful. It was almost the point about the CapEx spend, and off the back of the discussion about DeepSeek earlier. What's the impact going to be in the market, particularly with some of the players, as Alex has already said. Some of the big spenders already in the market, like Microsoft, Amazon, but also Meta, etc. What's your perspective on that? The dynamic between the cost base shifting, CapEx spend, etc.
I agree with Alex. I don't think it's gonna change the trajectory really very much at all. The plans that the hyperscalers have got to spend are multi-year. They're committed out. They've got long-range plans. They've got bigger goals than just build a better model. They've got goals around that to hoover up, to get their product on, as platform products across more other tools and products and into people's lives. So the cost of doing that is way more than just the cost of improving the model by the next generation. There's a lot of other CapEx that goes around all of that activity to really make their particular AI product integral to your life or to your business's life. And that's the game that they're in. And that's what the platform providers are in. So I agree with Alex. I don't think it'll change the trajectory really very much at all. And a lot of that spend that you see that from the hyperscalers, it is also, a lot of their products are aimed at big corporates. That's where the volume are. So that's why Microsoft did the whole relationship, got into the whole relationship with OpenAI so long ago with the early investment, and has been very close with them all the way through because embedding that flavor, that product in all of their tools and products has been key to their strategy. Same with Google with Gemini. So a lot of CapEx is predicated on big corporate spending over the next few years coming through. Whereas I do think at the smaller business end of the market, you're going to see some changes, and I do think DeepSeek will be one of the tools that becomes useful in helping small businesses use AI more effectively, and more importantly, smaller tool providers and tool makers integrating with DeepSeek as an option instead of Gemini or Claude or any of the other ones.
Yeah, and just coming back to Alex's point that he made earlier as well about the what do you think the misconceptions are if you swing it round here? And you sort of say we've talked a little bit about the breadth and the larger companies, but misconceptions here about some of the best business use cases for AI aren't necessarily what we think, are they?
Yeah, I think the big thing is the most at least for right now, the most successful use cases of AI don't look like AI. Don't look like what we think of as AI in our modern age. Because when you think about AI nowadays, right, you think about the chat interaction. That's what ChatGPT brought to the market, and this is still kind of. I think if you're just asking people what they think AI does, it's a chatbot. And that's it's highly powerful. But if you then look at the big use cases, and we have kind of two on our slides with two quotes just from earnings calls that happened recently on slides. Maybe we can pull them up. They they come from Meta and they come from Google. And Meta is reporting they are increasing their conversion rates in ads by 2 to 4%. Now, if anybody has ever done any ads, right, increasing conversion rates by 2 to 4%, it's a massive impact. That is massive. And what they are doing really is they are increasing the amount of time people spend on Facebook and Instagram on their platforms. By serving better content, they're matching ads to that content in a better way, and that helps them, just improve their take and make their ad. It makes their ad inventory more valuable. So for Meta, this results on their plus 50% average revenue per user over the last 2 years. Google on their call late last week, they are reporting that they have improved from one client their return on ad spend by 275%. So again, a massive number. And kind of both of them are AI examples. Both of them are some of these high ROI use cases for AI. But both of them don't look like, what we are now associating with AI, right? Both of them don't look like a chatbot interaction. So I think that's one of the misconceptions, right? It's this big misconception of, if you're using AI, you need to have a chat interface. Most people, in particular on the B2B side, on the user side of B2B, I still can't really figure out how to interact with a chatbot in any efficient way, in particular for kind of more high leverage applications. So I think that's one of these misconceptions. It's, the most successful use case for AI don't look like that. And the other one is, you don't have to kind of pony up massive upfront investments. Now, obviously, we're talking about Google and we're talking about Meta here, who clearly have put up some upfront investment. But what we've seen over the last 6-9 months or so is nobody does training anymore. Nobody other than somebody that wants to sell inference does training anymore. Nobody does fine tuning really. It's almost exclusively, it's agentic is the new buzzword. It's almost exclusively agentic AI. So it's, it's smart prompt design. It's having a pipeline that works. It's, getting the outputs that make that work. But all of that is almost exclusively variable cost. In particular on the AI side, it's almost exclusively variable cost. So it will just scale with usage, and it's very easy to have kind of a positive ROI use case, because you can figure out how much it costs, how much one interaction costs you, and then you just need to make more money than that to have a positive ROI.
No, I agree with you about the chatbot point. I think I was looking on Marvin Labs' analysis of Alphabet. I think their earnings results are out recently, and you saw some really interesting trends in there about their ad spend and the performance that they're now getting out of it off the back of AI. So I mean, that's a great sort of earnings season nugget that shows you what Marvin Labs as a tool pulls out. Mark, what's your take on this in terms of misconceptions? And I know you've talked a lot throughout your career about misconceptions. You've been involved in many of them, but just your thought on misconceptions.
I think that was a barbed dig at me. Well, the thing is, to use a car brand analogy. No, I'm not going to go down that.
You see, it was. Mark and I have history about misconceptions in this space.
So just going back to the use cases discussion that Alex was talking through there. The best use cases don't look like AI. They just look like better. They just look like better flavors of what we've had before. So more targeted, more adaptive commercials and advertising to particular audience segments, because both the audience demographics and the content that's going to go into the advertising campaign have been run through models and asked, does this work, or how should we adjust the advertising? And the results have then been used to improve the advertising, and it's been more effective. So to the eyeball that's seeing the ad, it's just another ad. But guess what? The click rate's a little bit higher. It's 2%, 3% higher. Behind the scenes, though, what's going on is that the tools are now coming to market that don't have that chat interface. They have AI embedded in them, supporting different aspects of the tools. And there's a couple that I use, and I'm not talking now about Google Sheets or Word, where it helps you write a bit better or it'll do a calculation. I'm talking about dedicated business process tools that sit in an operational process. And AI is being dropped into them to speed steps up, to automate workflows, to create content or to parse content that's coming in and out quicker, more efficiently. And that's, I'm not going to talk for Alex. That's a key part of Alex's proposition. But there's a number of tools in lots of different areas now. So I'm familiar with one in the recruitment space that does that. So there's AI in there now that parses a resume much more quickly and effectively than the old machine learning based rules did. It can read a resume and say, this person's with these skills and they're in this location, and this is their experience and seniority. And then you can say to it, okay, now write me a job description, and it will write a job description that's based, again, not just on a template, but more dynamically and more tailored to the exact role that's required. Those kinds of things are just built in. They just click, as you're doing as you're reviewing the resume or writing the job description, it's right there and built in, one click, done. So seeing tools embed AI in that way, and that's what to me is beginning to shape up. And as Alex was saying, the old way of doing things, a year or so old, right? Of sitting there with a prompt and typing stuff in. Yeah, we still do that. But if you go and play with ChatGPT now, you'll see that there's 6 or 9 or 10 different flavors of models that are specialized in different areas. So some will do calculations, some will do deep research, others are creative writing models. So we're starting to get, even the platform providers are getting more focused in their core offering to the consumer.
And I think one other thing we're really seeing, kind of, we spend a lot of time kind of listening to companies talk about, larger companies, listed companies, kind of reports on their results. And kind of, if you think back to a year ago, everybody had like we're doing AI, and we're doing kind of a very unspecific use case for AI. They had some had a chatbot. I don't want to kind of throw anybody under the bus, but there are some major banks that were reporting kind of excitedly that they released a chatbot that made the chat interaction like slightly less annoying, but still incredibly annoying.
Yes.
And they were quite happy about it, and they were reporting billions of interaction with the chatbot. And kind of one of the interesting things you see when you listen to companies, in particular when you listen to kind of some of the companies that a year ago spoke about AI in generic terms, they almost dropped it, right? You're far stretched to find a financial services firm talking about AI in any capacity on their earnings calls, in their press. The one exception being Goldman, who's been in the press like 1 or 2 weeks ago, saying that they can now write 97% of an IPO filing with an AI. I mean, that's actually quite simple, because that's a 97% of an IPO filing that nobody ever reads.
Absolutely.
So then there are people like us in the market cutting out these 97% again. So you're back to the reasonable part of the IPO report. But you rarely have financial services firms talk about it. There's a big sliver of the market that really kind of stopped talking about AI. You kind of now have these nuggets that we posted from Google, from Meta, that talk about AI applications. But I think a very interesting development over the last year is like people have stopped talking about AI in generic terms. People have stopped talking about AI in, it's going to come, we're going to introduce AI in our organization, and it's going to be the most amazing thing since sliced bread, without really knowing what people are doing. And you're here kind of.
I was going to say, it's interesting. Gartner has the they invented the technology hype curve, which you may be familiar with.
Yeah.
And it kind of, I'm not going to put it on screen, but it kind of peaks. It has this peak of excitement, and then there's a trough of disillusionment, and then it has the realism sets in, and the technology is adopted. We may have moved through that incredibly fast. I don't remember there being a trough of disillusionment, but I think maybe there quietly was, which was, okay, AI is not going to solve for world peace, and it's not going to cure cancer next week. It's just another tool that's come along. It's another tech tool. It's a cool one. It's a new one. It's more powerful than we've seen before, but it's another tool in the box. And now we're maybe maturing our view of AI.
I think you actually see kind of the disillusionment happening kind of slightly more in private, but you see this in large organizations. You see you hear so many stories of companies having this public announcement about unspecific AI advances and then dropping them. And they're dropping them not because they couldn't figure out, how to get OpenAI started. They're dropping them because they spent a year and quite a chunk of money on, mostly unspecific business cases with their IT organizations predominantly, so not with the business side, exploring some things. And I think what this shows is you have to go back to even those organizations, right? You have to go back to business 101, right? You need to have a business case that has a positive ROI. And if you have that, it works with or without AI.
I think your point about that. Oh, sorry, Mark. Well, I think your point there, Alex, is if you take some of the banking examples I've seen recently, particularly take transactional banking, where AI has now become much more integrated into transactional budgeting and spending, but firms aren't positioning it as we've invested a whole bunch of money to help people budget and manage monthly spending, but it's there, it's integrated within it. And that's what's powering people. The same with fraud tracking, anti-money laundering. It's the same thing. It's being integrated in deep within the systems, but it's not in announcements. Sorry, Mark, you were going to say.
I was actually about to make a point around cybersecurity and AML and fraud. So what I've seen over the last year is bad actors, particularly financially motivated ones. So the different types of bad actors in the marketplace, as they say. Some of them are motivated by espionage. Some of them are just hacktivists. Others are just want to cause chaos. And then there's a professionalized group who want to steal financially. That group in particular has adopted AI quite heavily. And one of the impacts of that, for example, has been that the quality of phishing emails has gone dramatically up. And the click-through rates on phishing emails has gone dramatically up. And that's happened because those terrible emails that used to come out of all kinds of parts of the world where people were writing them as the English as a second language, and there were spelling errors and grammatical errors, and the logo was in the wrong place. AI is fixing all that stuff for them, so they're sending much better phishing emails, and the click-through rate is higher. So the response to that,
it's clearly a high return on investment business case for them.
Very high return on investment for them.
Well, actually, can I just interject there, Mark? Because I had to have a sort of devil's advocate one there, that I questioned once somebody about those letters that are so poorly written, or emails, that most people reject them. And they said, and they were in the fraud industry. They said, that's exactly the point. They want 99.9% of people to immediately reject them and not waste their time on it. They want the 0.1 that hasn't recognized they're poorly written and poorly constructed, because they'll be more likely to be the ones that then are easier to commit fraud against. So it's a sort of an interesting point that to make it better now, they're kind of going counter to the original idea of creating such a poorly constructed piece anyway.
That's interesting, and I had not heard that from the fraud teams that I talked to, but may well be possible. But that's fine, because you can ask AI. You can ask AI to write a phishing email, but make sure there's one or two obvious errors in it, and it will give you exactly that. And still, so anyway. You get the point.
I do. I mean, I guess we've talked quite a bit about the DeepSeek and the current environment and where companies can get some opportunities. But what do you think about the future, where AI decision sort of making is the norm, not so much the exception? What's your thoughts on that, Alex? Just thinking more forward looking in the sort of last 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting proposition. I think a lot of AI solutions have been skirting around this decision of whether you are developing something like a co-pilot, helping people, or whether you're taking decisions away. And I think for very understandable reasons, most people, at least in the marketing, kind of are hammering home the point that they are a co-pilot. And I'm interested in seeing kind of where this is going. And I think that's one of the big kind of let's look into the future. the other side where I'm actually excited about the future, where I'm really excited about the future is like we've just had a massive change on the cost structure, right? For the last 2 years, we've been talking about chip shortages. We've been talking about, hundreds of billions of dollars investing. OpenAI once touted a 7 billion, sorry, it's not 7 billion is peanuts, a 7 trillion investment needed to, run training and run inference. And now we're kind of, we've set back the clock a bit on that. And now everybody is kind of familiar with this idea that, once you're lowering the cost, you kind of get more usage out of it. And maybe that is true. Maybe that's coming true. But I'm just excited, right? We've clearly had an inflection point where, we've done something on cost, and almost surely we've done something on resource usage. And that is the real big breakthrough that we've seen over the last month or so.
What do you think, Mark? Aside from the phishing emails, what else do you think will be exciting for the next 6 months?
Again, I don't think the trajectory of any of that CapEx spend will change very much. And I think, and I agree with Alex again. Microsoft called their AI, and when they embedded it in their products, Copilot for a reason. It is a Copilot. It is not the pilot. It is not the ultimate decision maker. Along the way, companies are looking at, and for my particular familiarity is especially in the anti-financial crime space, they're looking at using AI to help avoid false positives and positives that get missed and so on in screening for sanctions and fraud and all kinds of other things. But the ultimate decision has not been made by AI, but it will do the first and second layer of screening to figure out, is there something going on that requires a closer look. So the trajectory around decision making, I think, doesn't really change. Ultimately, decisions will reside with humans, but AI will provide better and better tooling along the way to make those decisions a fewer number and of higher quality. But I think going to the other point Alex was making, I think a number of business cases that were marginal or outside of the ROI parameters for organizations are now potentially coming inside those parameters. And you might see additional investments and additional business cases being explored that just weren't before DeepSeek came along with the quality and price point combination that they've got. And I think that's an interesting development. That's a really interesting development, and could spur further new products coming to market.
Do you think that development as well? Oh, sorry, I was going to ask you actually. It was a question for you actually. Do you think that development could lead to more consolidation?
I think it depends a bit on consolidation, where exactly in the value chain, right? If you look at the hyperscalers, right? I mean, I think there's always a question why there need to be 5, 6, 7 cloud vendors. But I mean, clearly they're all at scale. It's a highly competitive market. For some reason that kind of goes past most people understanding, including mine. It's a fairly lucrative market still for the people in the market. So I think historically the industry hasn't kind of seen any push for consolidation. What's also kind of interesting is that AI is still only a sliver in the income of the hyperscalers, right? I mean, Microsoft was touting that they are at, I think, 14, 15 billion AI income right now on an annual basis. And I think I'm not entirely sure, but they're so Azure's annual so Azure annually is like 250 billion roughly. So AI for a hyperscaler is still less than 5% of the income. So it's still kind of only a sliver, and we'll see kind of where this is pushing. But I don't think anything major change for a hyperscaler, maybe for the smaller ones. And then on the people that have kind of high ROI use cases for AI, I mean, kind of there's no pressure, right? I mean, it's a highly variable cost structure. So you don't need to have massive investment. So there's kind of, it almost feels like we've now had this realization that scale kind of is not really, at least if you're a user of AI, is not a major factor because everything is variable.
What do you think, Mark, around consolidation? And do you think that within sort of slightly linked question, do you think that there'll be an over-reliance, as it were, on automation? I think that's a risk that's coming.
I don't think there's a bajillion companies in this universe that are somehow using AI technology, either they're developing their own or they are using one of the platform AI products to build something else. It's such an enormous landscape. I don't detect any big consolidation yet, but I think it will come, but within very specific niches and segments over time. And I sort of have a sense that you might get consolidation in, for example, for example, in operational tools for a particular business process. So say you're a marketing company, and you have and I don't know what the tooling is. There's not my world, but probably a bunch of platforms that relate to placing digital ads, right? The platforms that have grown, that have AI best embedded and provide the most value for money and the best return on investment, were the platforms that grow and ultimately will either put out of business or consolidate against other platforms in that space over time. Okay, we'll see it. I think that's the sort of model we'll see in most segments, and that's our normal, natural business model anyway. A segment grows. There's lots of startups. 90% don't survive. They get consolidated one way or another, or few go out of business, but a lot get consolidated into something else because bigger players buy them for the technology or the customer base, or broadly those two things. So I think that pattern will happen in this space as well. But at the moment, I think we're still proliferating rather than consolidating. I think that's what's going on.
Can I just make a potentially controversial point? So I think the consolidation we'll see is in the model labs. It's in the OpenAI, Anthropic. It's in these kind of private organizations that are not part of any large. We're not going to see Google's AI efforts being consolidated into anybody else, but in these companies that have started doing AI research, put out some of their own modeling, and are kind of now being outcompeted, quite frankly. There are a few examples of well-funded research organizations, startups that haven't really put out a new model in a year or so, that are scoring incredibly poorly on the on any quality test, that have fairly anemic usage. So I think that might be where some consolidation is coming, right? Because we can't support, if you're a second, third tier research lab building out a model, even though you might have smart people, you're being left behind by the DeepSeeks.
Yeah. I mean, just off the back of that, actually, then that leads sort of like to the nice question around what signals should investors and market analysts look for, as AI adoption becomes more widespread, and to your point, there is consolidation or not at different layers. What sort of signals do you think people should be looking for? And particularly back to the point earlier that people aren't talking specifically about AI in the way they were maybe 1-2 years ago.
So I would be wary of people that commit so much money to CapEx. I would be wary of investment cases that are predicated on I'm going to spend 80 billion a year in building out cloud infrastructure. I think that is something that is that has over the last month gotten so much more risky, because you can really see that there is a considerable risk that your infrastructure might lose some value. And I think the attractive part of the space, if you're an investor, is high ROI use cases for AI. Do you have ad inventory that you can better use? Do you have unique content? Do you have particularly a niche where a lot of your services are still, human driven, where you can do some soft automation efforts? I think there are a lot of niches where you have these use cases. You might have not tackled them yet. You might have still been a bit skeptical, but where you see them, and I think, we've been quite open. We're big fans of Meta. I think we're getting around becoming big fans of Apple, who's kind of the large companies, been the one that stayed out of putting any CapEx or other investment into AI. I think kind of now it turns out that might have been a smarter move than committing 80 billion a year on CapEx as Microsoft does.
Yeah, and I think that plays actually circular back to the opening question, doesn't it? Discussion about with DeepSeek changing, as you saw on the grid earlier, the graph you showed changing the cost dynamic. The tie back to investors looking at CapEx, I think, is a very sensible one. Mark, what's your thoughts? Because I saw you nodding there to what Alex was saying.
I think if you're looking at any AI platform provider, I think the kind of metrics that you'll be looking at as an investor are the same for any product, any technology product. Their adoption, their frequency of use, their session length, their release cycles for the product. How often is it getting updated? And Alex mentioned, some of these smaller providers, they haven't updated the platform in a year, whereas Gemini's doing a release every 3 days or whatever it is, and probably Anthropic and OpenAI the same. And then you look at the financial ones. What revenues are they generating, and how many customers how many paying customers do they have? How many on the freemium model? How many on the paid model? So I don't think it's much different to any other tech product. Once you strip away the buzz and the hype and the excitement, it's those are the main measures.
Yeah, and just a final sort of couple of thoughts from both of you, because we've only got a couple of minutes left. What would be your sort of, perspective to the market or to the listener at the moment on AI for the bottom line? What's the number one thing you would call out?
I think it's really focusing on application, focusing on, if you're running an investment analysis, focus on what the company, if you have an AI use case, focus on what the company actually does with AI, what they can do better, and whether you believe that this is sensible and a profitable thing. Be wary of capital outlays, but really kind of look through if you can find something where using AI really makes sense.
I think mine would be the CapEx that you raised earlier. I think I'll go on that one. Mark, what's your perspective in that final minute?
Yeah, I think the CapEx is a big one. So I kind of agree with Alex that Apple may turn out to have been very, very smart in this space and just waited back, because they have a product. They've got a very closed system. They've got a captive market, not completely captive, but they've got all. They're in a quasi monopolistic position in providing particularly phones, where they've got a 90% market share. So they've waited, and I think they will go and they'll probably hoover up an AI platform at some point, or they'll do a partnership. I don't know which, but they'll do something. And so they're smart to do that. So really, the world breaks into two groups of companies: those that try to be right at the front of the curve OpenAI, Google's right behind Microsoft with OpenAI, Anthropic, and so on. And the ones that have said, you know what, we've got a big fat revenue base and a kind of a captive marketplace. We can afford to sit this one out for a little while because this is moving so quickly. A little while ain't going to be 7 years. It's going to be 1 year, 18 months, 24 months. And I think those companies that can do that and do that sensibly and strategically and intelligently will do well.
And I think on that note, it's not the first time I've heard that phrase, Apple might be right. On that note, thank you, Alex, for taking part in today's discussion. Thank you, Mark. And for those interested in Marvin Labs, visit the website. There's a free Copilot to use and see some of the earnings analysis that takes place using Marvin Labs. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to see you, James. Nice to see you.